The knock on Elena's shop door came after closing time, sharp and impatient, 3 times in a row. She almost did not answer. The street outside was dark, and the flower shop had been empty of customers for hours. But the knock came again, harder this time, and she moved toward the glass with her heart beating fast. A tall man stood on the other side, wrapped in a dark coat, his face calm but unreadable. 2 other men waited behind him near a black car, standing so still they looked like statues. Elena recognized the face from newspapers and hushed conversations around the city. Dominic Rossi. The name alone made most people cross the street, rather than pass too close. She opened the door only a few inches. "We're closed," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I know," Dominic answered. "I'm not here for flowers." Elena's hand tightened on the doorframe. Her father's debts had been eating away at the shop for months, and men had come before asking for money in ways that frightened her. She braced herself for another threat, another warning about payments due. Instead, Dominic said something she did not expect. "I need your help, and I am willing to pay very well for it." She almost laughed from nerves. "I don't know what you think I can do for a man like you." "Let me in," he said, "for 5 minutes. If you say no after that, I will walk away and you will never see me again." Something in his voice was not threatening. It was tired, almost human. Against every warning bell in her mind, Elena stepped back and let him inside. The shop smelled of roses and damp soil, and the quiet between them felt heavier than it should have. Dominic looked around at the buckets of flowers, the shelves of ribbon, the small wooden counter where Elena kept her father's old ledger. "You run this alone?" "Since my father got sick," she said. "The bills piled up. I'm barely keeping the lights on." "I know," Dominic said simply. "I looked into you before I came here." A chill ran through her. "Why would you look into me?" He did not answer right away. Instead, he pulled a folded envelope from his coat and set it on the counter between them. "There is a family in this city I need to make peace with. An old rival. They believe a man without a wife and children cannot be trusted to keep his word. It is old thinking, but it is their thinking, and I need their trust for a deal that matters more than you can imagine." Elena stared at him, waiting for the rest, already sensing where this was going. "I need a wife," Dominic said. "For 6 months. In public only. You would live in my home, appear beside me at certain events, and convince everyone watching that we are truly married. In exchange, every debt tied to this shop disappears, and you keep enough money afterward to never worry about these bills again." For a long moment, Elena said nothing. The offer was absurd, dangerous, impossible, and yet the numbers in her father's ledger flashed behind her eyes. The red ink, the final notice taped to the door only that morning. "You want me to lie to an entire family of criminals," she said slowly. "I want you to help me protect people who work for me, people who trust me to keep them safe," Dominic said. "This alliance stops a war before it starts. I am not asking you to hurt anyone. I am asking you to stand beside me and smile. And if I say no, then I walk out that door and you keep drowning in debt and I find another way," he said, no anger in his voice at all. "I will not force you into anything." Elena looked down at the envelope. She had spent years fighting alone to save something that used to be her father's pride. Pride did not pay bills. It did not stop the bank from taking the last thing her family owned. 6 months, she said quietly. 6 months, Dominic repeated. After that, you walk away free, with a new life waiting for you. She opened the envelope with shaking fingers and saw the number written inside. It was more money than she had ever imagined holding at once, enough to erase every debt, save the shop, and start fresh. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. "All right," she whispered. "I'll do it." Dominic did not smile, but something in his shoulders eased slightly, as if a burden had shifted. "You will move into my home tomorrow. My assistant, Lucia, will help you settle in and explain what is expected of you in public. There are rules you must follow for your own safety." "Rules," Elena repeated. "You never ask about my business. You never speak to strangers about where you came from before this. And you never leave the estate without someone from my staff nearby." His eyes met hers, steady and serious. "This is not a game, Elena. Some of the people I deal with are dangerous. As my wife, even a pretend one, you will be protected. But you must trust me enough to follow these rules." She swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how far over her head she had just stepped. "And if people find out it's fake?" "They won't," Dominic said, "because we won't let them." He left soon after, his car pulling away into the night, leaving Elena standing alone in her shop surrounded by flowers that suddenly felt like the last piece of an old life she was about to leave behind. She sat down behind the counter, staring at the envelope, her mind spinning with fear and something else she could not quite name. Excitement, maybe, or the strange electric feeling of stepping toward the edge of something enormous. That night she barely slept. She packed a single suitcase with clothes that felt too plain for the life she was about to enter, and she left a note for her elderly neighbor who watered her plants, saying only that she would be away for a while on family business. It felt like a small betrayal of the truth, but it was the safest lie she could offer. The next morning, a car arrived exactly on time. The driver, a broad-shouldered man named Carlo, held the door open without a word and drove her across the city to a part of town she had only seen from a distance. Iron gates opened onto a long driveway lined with trees, leading up to a mansion that looked more like a fortress than a home. Elena's stomach twisted as the car came to a stop. A woman with sharp eyes and dark hair pulled into a neat bun stepped out to greet her. "You must be Elena," she said, her tone brisk but not unkind. "I'm Lucia. I manage the household, and I will be helping you learn everything you need to know before your first appearance." Elena stepped out of the car, taking in the size of the estate, the quiet hum of security cameras mounted along the walls, the sense that every inch of the property was watched. "This is a lot to take in," she admitted. "It always is, at first," Lucia said, leading her toward the entrance. "But you'll adjust faster than you think. Mr. Rossi expects a great deal, but he is fair. Follow the rules, and you'll be fine." Inside, the mansion was elegant but not cold, with warm lighting and family portraits lining the hallway, though Elena noticed none of them showed a wife or children. Lucia caught her looking and offered a small explanation. His parents. He lost them young. It's part of why family means so much to him, even if his own has been small for a long time. Elena filed that piece of information away, unsure what to do with it yet. Lucia showed her to a bedroom on the second floor, spacious and quiet, overlooking a garden that reminded her, oddly, of her own shop. "This will be your room," Lucia said. "Mr. Rossi's room is down the hall. For appearances, staff and guests will assume you share a life together, but your privacy will be respected completely." "Thank you," Elena said, relieved at that small mercy. Over the following hours, Lucia walked her through everything, from the story of how she and Dominic supposedly met, to small details about his habits meant to make their marriage look convincing. He preferred his coffee black. He worked late most nights. He rarely spoke about his past, and Elena was warned never to press him on it in front of others. By evening, Elena's head was spinning with information, rules, and the strange unreality of her new life. She was standing by the window of her new room when she heard footsteps in the hallway, then a knock on her door. She opened it to find Dominic standing there, still in his dark coat, looking as composed as he had the night before. "Settling in?" he asked. "Trying to," she said. "This is a lot." "It gets easier," he said, echoing Lucia's words. "There is a dinner tomorrow night, with the family I mentioned. It will be your first appearance as my wife. Small, private, but important. I wanted you to hear the details from me directly." Elena nodded, trying to steady her nerves. "What should I expect?" "Their name is Conti. Antonio Conti leads the family. and he values tradition above almost everything else. His daughter Nadia will likely be there as well. Be polite, be warm, and let me handle the business talk. Your role is simply to be present and to seem happy. Seem happy, Elena repeated softly. That sounds easy enough to fake. For a brief moment, something flickered across Dominic's expression, something almost like amusement. You'd be surprised how hard it is for some people. Most who try this arrangement end up too nervous to hold a conversation, let alone convince a room full of suspicious men that they are loved. I'm not most people, Elena said, lifting her chin slightly, some old stubbornness rising in her despite the fear still sitting in her stomach. Dominic studied her for a long moment, something unreadable behind his dark eyes. No, he said finally. I don't think you are. He left her with that, and Elena closed the door behind him, leaning against it as her heart slowly settled back into a normal rhythm. Whatever she had walked into, there was no turning back now. Her old life waited behind her, buried in debt and worry, and ahead of her stood 6 months of pretending to be something she was not, in a world she barely understood. She thought of her father, and how disappointed or perhaps how relieved he might have been to know his daughter had found a way to save the only thing they had left. She thought of the shop, safe now, its future secured by a bargain struck in the dark, with a man the whole city feared. As she unpacked her small suitcase, placing her few belongings into the unfamiliar drawers of her new room, Elena caught her reflection in the mirror across from the bed. She looked the same as she always had, tired eyes, plain clothes, hair she had not bothered to style in weeks. But something behind her eyes had already begun to shift, some quiet resolve settling into place. Tomorrow night, she would step into a role unlike anything she had ever played, standing beside a man whose name alone made grown men nervous, pretending to love him in front of people who might hurt her if the truth ever slipped out. She should have been terrified. Part of her was, but another part, a part she did not fully understand yet, felt something closer to purpose, the first she had felt in a very long time. She turned off the light and lay awake for hours, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around her, footsteps in distant hallways, a car pulling in and out of the driveway, the quiet murmur of voices she could not quite make out. Somewhere down that hallway, Dominic Rossi was likely awake too, preparing for a meeting that could shift the balance of power in the city, carrying burdens she could only guess at. Elena closed her eyes and told herself the same thing over and over, until sleep finally took her. 6 months. She only had to survive 6 months, and then her old life, safe and quiet, would be waiting for her again. She had no way of knowing yet how much that promise would change before those 6 months were through, or how the line between pretending and feeling would begin to blur the very first time Dominic Rossi looked at her like she mattered. The morning came too fast. Sunlight spilled through unfamiliar curtains, and for a moment Elena forgot where she was. Then the weight of the day ahead settled over her, heavy and real. She dressed carefully in the outfit Lucia had left for her, a deep green dress that fit as though it had been made just for her, and stared at herself in the mirror, trying to recognize the woman staring back. Downstairs, the house was already busy with quiet preparation. Staff moved through the halls arranging flowers, setting the long dining table, adjusting lighting in the main sitting room where the Conti family would be received that evening. Elena wandered into the kitchen, unsure what else to do with the nervous energy building inside her, and found Dominic there, unexpectedly, drinking coffee at the counter in shirt sleeves, looking far less like a feared boss and far more like an ordinary man trying to start his day. "You're up early," he said, glancing at her over the rim of his cup. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Nervous about tonight?" "Terrified," she said honestly, and something about his small, surprised smile at her honesty eased a fraction of her fear. "You'll be fine," he said. "Just remember, Antonio respects strength more than perfection. If you stumble over a word, recover with confidence, and no one will think twice." "Easy for you to say," she murmured. "You've done this your whole life." "Not this," Dominic said. setting his cup down. I've never had a fake wife before. This is new for both of us. There was something oddly comforting in that admission. The idea that even a man like Dominic Rossi was stepping into unfamiliar territory alongside her. For the first time since agreeing to this strange arrangement, Elena felt not entirely alone in it. As the day stretched on, Lucia rehearsed her again on small details, the fabricated story of their courtship, dates and small memories, crafted carefully enough to survive casual questioning. Elena practiced saying them aloud until they felt almost natural on her tongue, until the lie began to sound less like fiction and more like a story she might actually believe herself. By the time evening arrived and the first car pulled through the gates, Elena stood beside Dominic in the entryway, her hand resting lightly at his elbow, exactly as Lucia had instructed. Her heart hammering beneath a calm expression she prayed looked convincing. Dominic glanced down at her, and for just a moment, something steadying passed between them, unspoken but real enough to hold on to. "Ready?" he asked quietly. Elena took a breath, straightened her shoulders, and nodded. "Ready." Before the guests arrived, Elena had asked for a few minutes alone, and Lucia had allowed her a short walk through the garden to settle her nerves. It was there that her closest friend Grace found her, having been let through the gates after Elena insisted on seeing her one last time before the evening began. Grace ran a small bakery 2 streets from Elena's old shop, and she was the only person outside the estate who knew even a fraction of the truth. "You look like you're about to walk into battle," Grace said, studying her carefully. "That's almost exactly how it feels," Elena admitted, smoothing the front of her dress with trembling hands. "You could still back out," Grace said gently. "Nobody would blame you for changing your mind." "I can't," Elena said. "The shop is safe now because of this. My father's name is finally out of debt. I made a promise, and I intend to keep it." Grace studied her for a long moment, something knowing in her expression. "This isn't only about the shop anymore, is it?" Elena opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again, unable to find the right words. "I don't know what it's about anymore," she admitted quietly. "A week ago, I thought this would be simple. Smile, pretend, collect the money, walk away. Now I'm standing in a garden that isn't mine, about to lie to men who could hurt me if they ever learned the truth, and somehow I'm more worried about disappointing Dominic than I am about my own safety." "That sounds like more than pretending," Grace said carefully. "It has to stay pretending," Elena said, though her voice lacked conviction. "That was the agreement. 6 months, then I go back to my old life." Grace reached out and squeezed her hand. "Just be careful. Men like that live surrounded by danger every single day. I don't want you disappearing into a world that isn't yours." "I'll be careful," Elena promised, though even as she said it, she wondered how much of her old, careful life she had already left behind the moment she stepped through the estate gates. They embraced briefly before Lucia appeared at the garden entrance, signaling that the first guests had arrived and it was time. Grace slipped quietly out through a side gate, and Elena straightened her shoulders, walking back toward the house where Dominic waited near the entrance, dressed sharply, his expression calm and composed despite whatever nerves he might have carried beneath the surface. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. "As ready as I'll ever be," she said, looping her arm through his, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her, a strange comfort in the middle of so much uncertainty. They walked together toward the front entrance, and Elena caught her reflection briefly in the tall hallway mirror, a woman transformed from the tired florist who had answered a knock on her door only days earlier into someone who now stood at the edge of an entirely different life. She took one final steadying breath. The doors opened, and the first true test of her new life began. The Conti family arrived exactly on time, 3 cars pulling smoothly into the circular driveway, and Elena felt her pulse quicken as the first door opened. Antonio Conti stepped out first, an older man with silver hair and sharp, assessing eyes that missed nothing. Behind him came his daughter Nadia, poised and elegant, studying Elena with open curiosity the moment their eyes met. Dominic moved forward to greet them, his hand finding the small of Elena's back to guide her along beside him, warm and steady, exactly as a real husband might. "Antonio," he said, extending his hand, "thank you for coming." "Dominic," Antonio replied, his voice carrying the weight of old authority. His gaze shifted to Elena. "And this must be your wife. I confess, I did not believe the rumors until this moment." "Elena," Dominic said, his tone warm in a way that startled her with how natural it sounded. "This is Antonio, and his daughter Nadia." Elena extended her hand, keeping her voice light despite the nerves twisting inside her. "It's wonderful to finally meet you both. Dominic has told me so much." "Has he?" Antonio said, something skeptical flickering behind his eyes. "He has told us very little, over the years." "Some things are worth keeping private," Dominic said smoothly, "until they're ready to be shared." The group moved inside, and dinner unfolded with careful choreography, every word measured, every laugh timed to seem effortless. Elena found herself seated beside Nadia, who watched her with an intensity that made her nervous beneath the polished surface of polite conversation. "How did you two meet?" Nadia asked, swirling the wine in her glass. "Dominic isn't exactly known for socializing." Elena recited the story exactly as she and Lucia had rehearsed it. A chance meeting at a charity event, a shared laugh over spilled wine, a slow friendship that grew into something more over the following year. She kept her tone soft, a little shy, letting small details slip in the way real memories might, a habit of using her hands when nervous, a fondness for a certain kind of tea Dominic supposedly always kept stocked for her. "That's sweet," Nadia said, though her eyes remained sharp, unconvinced. "I didn't take Dominic for the romantic type." "People change," Dominic said from across the table, his gaze meeting Elena's with an ease that sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. "Sometimes the right person changes everything." Antonio observed the exchange in silence, his expression unreadable, before finally speaking again. "Family matters to me more than any business arrangement, Dominic. If this alliance is to move forward, I need to know the man standing beside me values the same things I do." "I do," Dominic said, his voice steady and sincere. "More than you know." The dinner continued for 2 more hours, filled with careful conversation about trade routes and shared territories, subjects Elena understood only in fragments, careful not to ask questions that might expose how little she truly knew about Dominic's world. She smiled when appropriate, laughed softly at small jokes, and reached for Dominic's hand once beneath the table when Antonio's questions grew pointed, a gesture that felt startlingly natural despite everything false about the moment. By the time the Conti family departed, the tension in the house seemed to ease slightly, though Elena's legs felt weak with relief the moment the front door closed behind them. She exhaled slowly, leaning against the wall of the entryway. "You did well," Dominic said, watching her with something like genuine appreciation. "I feel like I just ran a marathon," Elena admitted, laughing shakily. "You handled Antonio better than most people twice your age," he said. "He's a hard man to read, but I think tonight went further than I expected." "Do you think he believed us?" Dominic considered the question carefully. "I think he wants to believe us. That matters more than you'd think." Over the following days, life at the estate settled into a strange new rhythm. Elena learned the routines of the household, the quiet efficiency of the staff, the way Dominic disappeared for hours at a time into meetings she was never permitted to attend. She spent her mornings in the garden, drawn instinctively to the flowers there, and her afternoons slowly getting to know Lucia, who, despite her sharp exterior, proved surprisingly kind once Elena stopped seeing her only as an employee of a dangerous man. "You're not what I expected," Lucia admitted one afternoon as they sat together trimming roses from the garden beds. "Most people who come through this house are either terrified or greedy. You're neither." "I'm terrified," Elena said honestly. I'm just better at hiding it than most, apparently. Lucia smiled faintly. That's a useful skill in this life. Elena found herself, almost without meaning to, growing curious about the man whose home she now shared. She noticed small things, the way he always checked twice that the doors were locked before retiring for the night, the way his shoulders relaxed only in the quiet hours after midnight when the house had gone still, the framed photograph on his desk of two people she assumed were his parents, worn soft at the edges from years of handling. One evening, unable to sleep, she wandered downstairs and found him in his study, a glass of untouched whiskey beside him, staring at nothing in particular. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face before settling into something quieter. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. "Too much on my mind," she said, stepping inside despite every rule Lucia had warned her about respecting his privacy. "Can I ask you something?" He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Go ahead." "The photograph," she said, nodding toward the frame. "Your parents?" Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of old pain carefully controlled. "My mother and father. They died when I was young, before I understood what kind of world they were trying to protect me from." "I'm sorry," Elena said softly. "It was a long time ago," he said, though his voice carried a weight that suggested the wound had never fully healed. "This life, this world, it's not something I chose so much as something I inherited. I've spent most of my years trying to make it safer than it was for them." Elena studied him quietly, seeing for the first time the man beneath the reputation, someone shaped by loss and duty rather than the ruthless figure the newspapers described. Is that why the alliance with Antonio matters so much? To keep the peace? "Peace keeps people alive," Dominic said simply. "I've buried enough people I cared about. I don't intend to bury more if I can help it." The vulnerability in his voice caught her off guard, and for a moment, the careful distance between them seemed to soften entirely. "You're not what people say you are," she said quietly, almost to herself. "And what do people say?" he asked, a faint, tired smile touching his lips. "That you're cold, dangerous, unfeeling." "I am dangerous," he admitted. "But not unfeeling. Never that." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while longer, the late hour stretching around them, before Elena finally rose to return to her room. At the doorway, she paused. "Good night, Dominic." "Good night, Elena," he said, and something in the way he said her name lingered with her long after she had closed her bedroom door behind her. The weeks that followed carried them deeper into the rhythm of their arrangement. Public appearances grew easier, their fabricated story smoothing into something that felt almost real each time they told it. At galas and dinners, Dominic's hand found hers naturally, his eyes softening in a way that no longer felt entirely like performance. Elena caught herself, more than once, forgetting the arrangement was supposed to be temporary, forgetting that the warmth blooming quietly in her chest was never meant to be part of the deal. On a rare quiet Sunday, Dominic suggested they leave the estate entirely, away from staff and appearances, simply to walk through the old part of the city where neither of them was likely to be recognized. Elena agreed eagerly, craving a few hours that felt untouched by performance. They wandered past small shops and narrow streets lined with cafes, and for the first time since her arrival, Elena felt something close to normal settle over her. "You seem different out here," she said, watching him study a street vendor's display of old books, with genuine interest rather than calculated attention. "I don't get many chances to just exist," Dominic admitted. "Most of my life is spent managing threats, calculating outcomes, protecting people who depend on me. Days like this remind me there's still a person underneath all of that." "I like this version of you," Elena said before she could stop herself. Dominic glanced at her, something warm flickering behind his usual composure. "I like this version of myself too, when you're the reason it comes out." They stopped at a small cafe for coffee, sitting outside beneath a striped awning, watching the ordinary rhythm of the street around them. Children chasing a ball, An elderly couple arguing gently over a newspaper, a musician playing softly near the corner. It was such a small, simple afternoon, and yet Elena found herself memorizing every detail of it, aware that moments like this were rare and fragile within the world Dominic inhabited. "Can I tell you something honestly?" she asked, turning her cup slowly between her hands. "Always," he said. "When you first came to my shop, I thought I understood exactly what kind of man you were. Cold, distant, dangerous. I told myself I could survive 6 months beside someone like that, collect the money, and walk away without looking back." She paused, meeting his eyes. "I didn't expect any of this to feel real." Dominic reached across the small table, covering her hand with his. "Neither did I," he admitted quietly. "I've spent years keeping people at a careful distance, convinced it was safer that way, for them and for me. You've made that distance very difficult to maintain." The walk back toward where Carlo waited with the car felt slower than necessary, neither of them eager to return to the careful performance waiting for them at the estate. It was a small, stolen afternoon, ordinary in every way that mattered, and Elena carried the warmth of it with her long after they returned home. One afternoon, a few days later, while helping Lucia prepare for an upcoming charity event Dominic was hosting, Elena found herself in his study again, searching for a folder of papers Lucia needed. She noticed a drawer left slightly open, and inside it, tucked beneath other documents, a small stack of letters addressed to a woman whose name she did not recognize. Curiosity pulled at her, but before she could look closer, footsteps approached, and she quickly closed the drawer, heart pounding with something that felt uncomfortably close to jealousy, an emotion she had no right to feel in a marriage built entirely on lies. That evening, over a quiet dinner shared just between the two of them, Elena found herself watching Dominic more closely than usual, noticing the small furrow in his brow when he thought no one was looking, the way his fingers occasionally drummed against the table as though working through some private worry. "You seem distracted tonight," she said finally. Dominic glanced up, surprised by her observation. "Business," he said simply. "Nothing you need to worry about." "You keep saying that," Elena said, gentler than she intended, "but I live in this house too. Whatever happens here affects me as well." He studied her for a long moment, something conflicted behind his eyes, before finally speaking. "There have been whispers. Some in Antonio's circle question whether our marriage is real. If those whispers reach the wrong ears, it could unravel everything I've worked to build." Elena's stomach tightened. "What do we do?" "We continue as we have been," Dominic said. "Convincingly. Completely. There can be no room left for doubt." Something in his tone carried an unspoken challenge, and without fully understanding why, Elena reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "Then we won't leave any room," she said quietly. Dominic's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them, warmer and more dangerous than either of them was prepared to admit. For the first time since this arrangement began, Elena realized with quiet, terrifying clarity that the line between pretending and truly feeling had already begun to disappear, and she was no longer entirely sure she wanted to find her way back to the other side of it. The grand ballroom shimmered with light. Chandeliers throwing gold across the crowd gathered for the charity gala Dominic had spent weeks preparing. Elena stood beside him near the entrance, dressed in deep blue silk, greeting guests with practiced warmth, when a familiar voice cut through the noise behind her, freezing her entire body in place. "Elena? Is that really you?" She turned slowly, and her stomach dropped. Marco stood only a few feet away, older than she remembered, dressed sharply in a tailored suit that suggested he had done well for himself in the years since he vanished from her life. His expression carried the same easy charm she remembered, the same charm that had once convinced her to trust him completely before he disappeared with everything her father had left behind. "Marco," she managed, her voice tight. "I almost didn't recognize you," he said, his eyes sweeping over her with open admiration. "You look incredible." Dominic's hand found the small of her back. steady and protective, though his eyes studied Marco with quiet, calculating interest. "A friend of yours?" he asked, his tone smooth but edged with something sharper beneath the surface. "An old acquaintance," Elena said quickly, before Marco could answer for her. "Old acquaintance," Marco repeated, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "That's one way to put it." "Marco Delacroix," he said, extending a hand toward Dominic. "I work with the Conti family now, handling their financial partnerships." Elena's blood ran cold. Of all the people in the city Marco could have aligned himself with, he had chosen the very family whose trust Dominic desperately needed to secure. The coincidence felt too sharp to be an accident. Dominic shook his hand with practiced ease, though Elena could feel the tension radiating from him. "Interesting timing," he said. "I wasn't aware Antonio had brought in new financial advisors." "Only recently," Marco said smoothly. "I have a talent for finding opportunities others overlook." The conversation shifted to safer topics, and Marco eventually excused himself, disappearing back into the crowd, though not before catching Elena's eye one final time, with a look that promised this was far from over. She excused herself moments later, retreating to a quiet balcony to steady her racing heart, and it was there that Marco found her again. "You didn't tell me you'd married into this world," he said, stepping onto the balcony behind her, his voice low. "I don't owe you any explanations," Elena said, turning to face him, anger finally breaking through her fear. "No," Marco agreed, "but I think we both know your marriage isn't quite what it appears to be." Her heart stopped. "What are you talking about?" "I have contacts, Elena, people who know Dominic Rossi's history. A man like him doesn't fall in love and marry within a year, especially not to a florist with a struggling shop and mounting debts. Something doesn't add up." He studied her carefully, a slow, calculating smile spreading across his face. "I think you're playing a role, and I think if the Conti family found out, it would destroy whatever alliance your husband is trying to build." Elena's hands trembled at her sides, though she forced her voice to remain steady. "Whatever you think you know, you're wrong." "Am I?" Marco stepped closer, lowering his voice further. "Here's what I propose. You help me get closer to Dominic's operations, feed me small pieces of information, and your secret stays safe with me. Refuse, and I make one phone call to Antonio Conti that unravels everything you and your husband have built." "You're asking me to betray him," Elena said, disbelief and fury coloring her words. "I'm asking you to protect yourself," Marco corrected. "The way you should have protected yourself years ago, before you let your father's foolish pride bury you both in debt." The mention of her father cut deeper than she expected, old wounds reopening beneath his casual cruelty. "You're the reason we were in debt in the first place," she said, voice shaking with barely controlled anger. "You stole from my father and disappeared." Marco's expression flickered, something almost like guilt, passing quickly before hardening back into calm confidence. "That was a different time, a different version of me. I'm offering you a chance to walk away from this clean. Think about my offer, Elena. You don't have much time to decide." He left her standing alone on the balcony, the cold night air doing nothing to calm the storm raging inside her. She gripped the railing, trying to steady her breathing, trying to think through the impossible situation Marco had just placed her in. Betray Dominic, or risk everything unraveling in front of the very family whose trust he needed most. "Elena?" She turned to find Dominic standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "How long have you been there?" she asked, panic rising in her chest. "Long enough," he said quietly, stepping closer. "Who was that man to you, really?" For a long moment, Elena considered lying, burying the truth, the way she had buried so much else since agreeing to this arrangement. But something about the steady, patient way Dominic waited for her answer made the lie impossible to hold on to. "His name is Marco," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "We were engaged, years ago. He drained my father's accounts and disappeared the week before our wedding. I never saw him again, until tonight." Dominic's jaw tightened, something dark and controlled passing behind his eyes. "And what did he want from you just now?" Elena hesitated, then forced herself to continue. "He knows our marriage isn't real. He's threatening to expose us to Antonio unless I help him get information about your business." The silence that followed stretched long and heavy between them. Elena braced herself for anger, for the cold fury she had heard whispered about in stories of Dominic Rossi's reputation. Instead, when he finally spoke, his voice carried something far more unsettling than rage, a quiet, controlled intensity that frightened her more than shouting ever could have. "He threatened you," Dominic said, more statement than question. "Yes," Elena admitted. "No one threatens what's mine," he said, and though the words should have unsettled her further, something in the way he said them, protective rather than possessive, sent an unexpected warmth spreading through her chest, despite the danger surrounding them. "What do we do?" she asked. "We find out exactly what Marco Delacroix is really after," Dominic said, his mind already working through the problem with the same calm precision he applied to every threat against his world. "A man like that doesn't align himself with the Conti family by accident, especially not right when our alliance is being tested. Someone brought him in deliberately." "You think he's working for someone else?" Elena said slowly, understanding dawning. "I think," Dominic said, "that we've just found the first crack in whatever plan is being built against us." They returned to the gala separately, careful not to draw attention, though Elena's mind raced through everything Marco had said, every threat, every calculated word designed to manipulate her into betrayal. She caught his eyes once more across the crowded room, and the confident smile he offered sent a fresh wave of dread through her. Over the following days, Dominic quietly began investigating Marco's connections, working alongside Vincent, his most trusted advisor, piecing together fragments of information gathered through careful, discreet channels. Elena found herself drawn into these conversations more than she expected, offering what little she knew about Marco's past, his patterns, his weaknesses. "He's always been good at finding people's soft spots," Elena said one evening, sitting across from Dominic and Vincent in the study, the same room where late-night conversations had slowly built something real between her and Dominic. "He knew exactly what to say to convince my father to trust him. He'll know exactly what to say to convince others too. Which makes him dangerous," Vincent said grimly, "and useful to whoever placed him near the Conti family." "Do we know who that is yet?" Elena asked. Dominic exchanged a look with Vincent before answering carefully. "We have suspicions. There's a faction within the wider network, families who've never accepted the peace agreements holding this city together. If they're using Marco to destabilize my alliance with Antonio, it means they're preparing for something larger." The weight of his words settled heavily over the room. Elena thought of Marco's threat on the balcony, the casual cruelty in his voice, and realized with growing unease that she had become far more entangled in Dominic's dangerous world than she ever intended. "What happens if Antonio finds out about us before we're ready?" she asked quietly. "Then, everything I've built collapses," Dominic said simply, "and people who trust me to protect them become vulnerable to men who have no interest in peace." Elena studied him across the dim light of the study, seeing clearly now the enormous weight he carried, far heavier than she had understood when she first agreed to this arrangement. What began as a simple exchange, her silence and companionship for financial security, had grown into something far more complicated, tangled with real danger and, though she was only beginning to admit it to herself, real feelings she had never intended to develop. Later that same week, Elena found Lucia in the kitchen preparing tea, and the quiet domestic scene offered a small, welcome escape from the tension pressing down on the entire household. She sat at the counter, watching Lucia work, and finally allowed herself to voice the fear she had been carrying since the gala. "Do you think we can actually stop this?" she asked quietly. "Marco, Greco, whoever else is involved?" Lucia set the kettle down and studied her carefully. "I've worked for this family a long time, Elena. I've seen Dominic face threats far more direct than this one, and he has always found a way through. What worries me more is you. Me? You've become part of this world faster than anyone expected, Lucia said gently. That comes with real danger, not just the pretend kind you agreed to in the beginning. I want you to understand that before you go any further into whatever plan Dominic and Vincent are building. I understand, Elena said, and found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she meant it completely. I'm not walking away from this. Not from him, and not from whatever comes next. Lucia's expression softened slightly, something like approval passing behind her sharp eyes. Then be careful, and know that whatever happens, you're not facing it alone in this house. The following afternoon, while running a small errand into the city with Carlo waiting nearby, Elena crossed paths unexpectedly with Nadia Conti outside a small boutique. Nadia's expression carried none of the polite curiosity from their first meeting, replaced instead by something sharper, more guarded. I heard about Marco, Nadia said without preamble, falling into step beside her. My father is furious that someone infiltrated our circle so easily. I imagine he is, Elena said carefully, unsure how much Nadia already knew. For what it's worth, Nadia continued, lowering her voice, I believe you. About your marriage, about everything. I wasn't sure at first, but the way you handled yourself with Marco, the way you exposed him, rather than protecting yourself at Dominic's expense, that told me more than any rehearsed story about how you met ever could. The unexpected kindness in Nadia's words caught Elena off guard. Thank you, she said sincerely. That means more than you probably realize. Watch yourself, Nadia added, her tone shifting back toward caution. Greco doesn't give up easily, and my father's patience for this alliance is not unlimited. Whatever you and Dominic are building, real or otherwise, prove it's worth protecting. Elena carried those words with her the rest of the day, turning them over carefully, understanding that the fragile trust they had built with the Conti family remained just that, fragile, and could still unravel if they failed to act quickly and decisively against the threat still gathering strength beyond the estate walls. We'll figure this out together, she said finally, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Dominic looked at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his careful composure. Together, he agreed quietly, and the words settled between them, no longer just part of the performance they had built for the world outside, but something quietly, dangerously real. The days that followed moved with a tension Elena had never experienced before. Every conversation weighed carefully, every outing planned with new caution. Vincent's investigation slowly uncovered pieces of a larger picture, and what they found confirmed their worst fears. Marco was not acting alone. He had been placed near the Conti family by a rival faction led by a man named Salvatore Greco, an old enemy of Dominic's father, who had spent decades waiting for an opportunity to unravel the peace holding the city's families together. Greco wants Antonio to break the alliance before it's even formed, Vincent explained one evening, spreading documents across the study table. If he can convince Antonio that Dominic is dishonest, unreliable, someone who lies even about something as simple as his own marriage, the trust required for this partnership collapses entirely. And without that trust, Dominic added grimly, Greco moves in to offer Antonio an alliance of his own, one built on eliminating everything my family worked to establish. Elena sat quietly, absorbing the scope of what she had unknowingly stepped into. What began as a simple arrangement to save her shop had pulled her into the center of a conflict far larger than she ever imagined, one where a single mistake could unravel years of careful, dangerous peacekeeping. What does Marco actually want from all this? She asked. Money? Power? Likely both, Vincent said. Greco would have promised him a significant reward for successfully destabilizing the alliance. Men like Marco are drawn to opportunity, regardless of who gets hurt along the way. Elena thought of Marco's easy smile at the gala, the casual way he had threatened her, and felt a fresh wave of anger rise beneath her fear. He's using the same tricks he used on my father, finding people's weaknesses and exploiting them without a second thought. Then we use that against him, Dominic said, something calculating sharpening behind his eyes. If Marco believes you might actually help him, we can control what information reaches Greco, feed him just enough to keep him confident while we work to expose the entire plan to Antonio ourselves, on our terms, before Marco has the chance. The plan formed carefully over the following days, every detail weighed and reconsidered. Elena would meet Marco privately, pretending to consider his offer, gathering whatever information she could about his connection to Greco, while Dominic and Vincent worked to build an undeniable case to present to Antonio directly. The night of the meeting arrived with a tension that made Elena's hands tremble as she prepared to leave the estate. Dominic found her in the hallway, dressed simply, trying to steady her nerves before facing Marco alone. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly, concern evident beneath his composed exterior. "We can find another way." "There isn't time for another way," Elena said, though her voice wavered slightly. "Marco expects an answer soon. If I don't give him something, he might act on his threat regardless." Dominic studied her for a long moment, something protective and unspoken passing behind his eyes. "Carlo will be nearby the entire time. If anything feels wrong, anything at all, you leave immediately. Understood?" "Understood," she said, though the weight of what she was about to do settled heavily in her chest. Before she left, Dominic caught her hand gently, an unexpected tenderness in the gesture. "Elena," he said, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it, "whatever happens tonight, thank you. For trusting me with the truth about Marco. For staying, even when things became more dangerous than either of us anticipated." Something in his words, the sincerity behind them, settled deep in her chest. "I didn't have much choice," she said softly, "but I don't regret it." Not anymore. The meeting with Marco took place in a quiet cafe on the edge of the city, chosen deliberately for its distance from both Dominic's and Antonio's territories. Marco arrived exactly on time, his confident smile firmly in place as he slid into the booth across from her. "I knew you'd come around," he said, satisfaction evident in his voice. "I need to know exactly what you want," Elena said carefully, forcing her voice to remain steady, despite the anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. Marco leaned forward, lowering his voice. Small things at first, meeting schedules, names of the people Dominic trusts most, nothing that would immediately raise suspicion, but enough to give Greco's people an advantage. "And if I refuse to give you more later?" Elena asked, carefully steering the conversation toward the information she truly needed. "You won't," Marco said confidently, "because by then, you'll be too deep into this to walk away safely. That's how these things work, Elena. Small steps, until there's no path back." His casual cruelty, the ease with which he described manipulating her into a trap, hardened something inside Elena that had once been fear into something closer to cold resolve. "Tell me about Greco," she said carefully. "If I'm going to help you, I need to understand who I'm really dealing with." Marco studied her for a moment, suspicion flickering briefly, before easy confidence returned. Salvatore Greco has been waiting decades for an opportunity like this. Dominic's father humiliated him in a business deal years before Dominic was even born. Greco wants nothing more than to watch everything the Rossi family built collapse, piece by piece, starting with this alliance. And what happens to Antonio once the alliance collapses? Antonio becomes Greco's newest ally, Marco said simply, whether he realizes it's part of a larger plan or not. Elena absorbed every detail carefully, committing it to memory, knowing each piece would matter when the moment came to expose the entire scheme to Antonio directly. She left the meeting shortly after, promising Marco a decision within days, though her mind was already working through everything Dominic and Vincent would need to move forward. Carlo waited exactly where he promised, driving her swiftly back to the estate, where Dominic paced anxiously in the entryway, relief washing visibly over his features the moment she stepped through the door. "Are you all right?" he asked immediately, closing the distance between them. "I'm fine," Elena said, though exhaustion from the tension of the evening pulled heavily at her. "I have everything we need." Marco confirmed Greco's involvement and his motive against your family. Dominic listened carefully as she relayed every detail, his expression growing more focused with each piece of information. "This is exactly what we needed," he said finally. "With this, we can go to Antonio directly, expose Greco's plan before Marco has any chance to twist the narrative in his favor." Vincent arrived shortly after, and the three of them spent the following hours building a careful presentation of evidence, timelines, and testimony strong enough to convince even a man as cautious and traditional as Antonio Conti. Through it all, Elena found herself working alongside Dominic, not as a fake wife performing a role, but as a genuine partner facing danger together, their earlier pretense dissolving into something far more real with each passing hour. The next morning brought a fresh complication. Carlo reported that a car had followed them at a distance during part of the drive back from the cafe the night before, peeling away only once they passed through the estate gates. Dominic's expression turned grim as he listened to the details. "Greco knows you met with Marco," he said, pacing slowly across the study floor. "Which means he's watching more closely than we assumed." "Does that change our plan?" Elena asked, trying to keep the alarm out of her voice. "It means we move faster," Vincent said, already gathering the documents scattered across the desk. "The longer we wait to present this to Antonio, the more chances Greco has to shift the narrative or silence the evidence entirely." Dominic crossed the room and knelt beside Elena's chair, taking her hands gently in his. "From this point forward, you don't leave the estate without Carlo and at least one additional guard. I know that feels like a loss of freedom, but I need to know you're protected while we finish this." "I trust you," Elena said, squeezing his hands. "Whatever it takes to keep everyone safe." Security around the estate tightened noticeably over the following 2 days. Additional guards stationed quietly near the gates and gardens. Every visitor checked twice before being allowed near the main house. Elena adjusted to the new precautions without complaint, understanding now the very real weight of the danger surrounding them, no longer an abstract fear but a tangible presence lurking somewhere beyond the estate walls. On the second evening, Vincent arrived with news that shifted the mood of the entire household. "We have enough now," he said, spreading a final set of documents across the study table. Recorded testimony, financial records linking Greco's payments to Marco, and timeline evidence proving deliberate interference in the alliance. It's enough to bring directly to Antonio. Relief and renewed tension mixed together in Elena's chest. The evidence existed now, undeniable and complete, but presenting it carried its own risks, especially with Greco aware that his plan had already been partially exposed. Late into the night, once Vincent had finally departed and the house settled into quiet, Elena found herself once again in the study with Dominic, both of them too exhausted and too wired with adrenaline to sleep. He poured 2 glasses of wine, offering one to her as she sank into the chair across from his desk. "You were incredible tonight," he said quietly. "Braver than I expected, honestly." "I surprised myself too," Elena admitted, managing a tired laugh. "A few months ago, I was just trying to keep my flower shop open. Now I'm gathering intelligence on mob bosses." Dominic's lips curved into a small, genuine smile, rare and unguarded. "Life has a strange way of changing course when we least expect it." "It certainly does," Elena murmured, studying him over the rim of her glass. "Can I ask you something honestly?" "Always," he said. "Does any part of this still feel fake to you?" she asked quietly. "Because it stopped feeling that way to me somewhere along the last few weeks, and I don't know what to do with that." Dominic set his glass down slowly, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. "No," he said finally, his voice low and honest. "It stopped feeling fake to me a long time ago, Elena. I've just been afraid to say it out loud." The space between them felt charged, fragile, balanced on the edge of something neither of them had planned for when this arrangement first began. Elena set her own glass aside, her heart pounding as she closed the distance between their chairs. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said softly. Dominic rose slowly, reaching out to gently cup her face, his touch tender despite the danger and power that defined every other part of his life. "Neither am I," he whispered, before finally closing the distance between them entirely. The kiss that followed was unhurried, honest, carrying none of the performance that had defined every previous moment between them in public. It was real, undeniably real, and when they finally parted, both breathless and quietly overwhelmed, Elena understood with complete clarity that whatever else happened in the dangerous days ahead, her feelings for Dominic Rossi were no longer part of any arrangement. They were entirely, irrevocably her own. But even as warmth and hope bloomed fragile and new between them, the danger surrounding their fragile happiness had not disappeared. Somewhere across the city, Marco waited for an answer that would never come the way he expected, and Salvatore Greco continued moving pieces into place for a confrontation that would soon threaten everything Elena and Dominic had built, both false and painfully, wonderfully real. 3 days later, Antonio Conti sat across from Dominic in the same dining room where Elena had first met him, though the mood this time carried none of the careful pleasantries of their earlier dinner. Vincent had arranged the meeting quietly, requesting Antonio's presence without revealing the full purpose, and Elena sat beside Dominic now, her hands folded tightly in her lap as they prepared to lay out everything they had uncovered. "You requested this meeting under unusual circumstances," Antonio said, his sharp eyes moving between them. "I assume there's a reason beyond hospitality." "There is," Dominic said, sliding a folder of carefully organized evidence across the table. "Marco Delacroix, the man you recently welcomed into your financial circle, has been working for Salvatore Greco since before he ever approached your family." Antonio's expression hardened as he opened the folder, scanning through documents, recorded details, and the timeline Elena had helped piece together from her conversation with Marco. "Explain," he said simply, his voice tight with controlled anger. Dominic recounted everything carefully, from Marco's sudden reappearance in Elena's life to his explicit threats and his admission of working to destabilize their alliance on Greco's behalf. Antonio listened in silence, his jaw tightening further with each detail, until finally he set the folder down and looked directly at Elena. "He threatened you," Antonio said, more statement than question. "Yes," Elena confirmed, her voice steady despite the nerves still churning beneath the surface. "He believed our marriage was fabricated for this alliance, and threatened to expose that unless I helped him gather information against Dominic." A heavy silence settled over the room before Antonio spoke again, his tone measured but carrying an edge of genuine respect. "And instead of complying, you chose to expose the plot against us both." "I chose the truth," Elena said simply. "Whatever else is true about my marriage, I would never help someone like Marco hurt people I care about." Something shifted in Antonio's expression, old suspicions softening slightly into consideration. He turned back to Dominic. "Greco has been a thorn in every family's side for decades. If what you're telling me is true, this goes beyond simple business rivalry. He's trying to manipulate all of us into a war that benefits no one but himself." "That's exactly what he's counting on," Dominic said. "Distrust between us weakens both our positions. United, we remove his influence entirely." Antonio studied the evidence once more, weighing the implications carefully, before finally nodding. "I'll deal with Marco myself. As for Greco, if what you're proposing is a united front against him, I'm willing to discuss terms." Relief washed through Elena, though she understood immediately that the danger was far from over. Marco would not simply disappear quietly once confronted, and Greco, having lost his foothold within the Conti family, would likely escalate his efforts elsewhere. The following days moved quickly as Dominic and Antonio worked together, formalizing an alliance built now on genuine trust rather than fragile pretense. Marco, confronted by Antonio directly, vanished from the city within hours, understanding clearly that his usefulness to Greco had ended the moment his betrayal was exposed. Elena felt a complicated relief at his departure, the final closing of a chapter from her past that had haunted her for years. But Greco, cornered and desperate, did not retreat quietly. Word reached Dominic through his network that Greco was gathering support from smaller, disaffected factions within the city, preparing one final, reckless attempt to disrupt the alliance before it solidified completely. Vincent worked around the clock coordinating security, while Dominic met privately with allies across the city, building support to isolate Greco entirely before he could cause any real damage. Elena found herself drawn fully into this final tense stretch, no longer standing on the sidelines of Dominic's world, but standing firmly within it, offering insight, support, and a steady presence through the uncertainty. Late one evening, as Dominic reviewed security details with Vincent in the study, Elena brought them both coffee, lingering afterward to listen, understanding now far more about the dangerous balance Dominic worked tirelessly to maintain. "Greco's running out of options," Vincent said, marking locations on a map spread across the desk. "Most of the families he approached have already declined to join him, especially after word spread about his manipulation involving Marco." "He's cornered," Dominic agreed, "which makes him more dangerous, not less. Desperate men take desperate risks." "What's his next move likely to be?" Elena asked, settling into the chair beside them. "Unclear," Vincent admitted, "but we're prepared regardless." The days leading up to that final confrontation passed slowly. Each hour stretched thin with anticipation. Elena spent much of that time in the garden, tending to the flowers she had planted there, finding a strange comfort in the simple, patient work of coaxing new growth from soil that had once felt entirely foreign to her. Lucia often joined her, and the two women worked quietly side by side, saying little but finding comfort in each other's company as the household braced for whatever came next. "You've changed this place," Lucia observed one afternoon, gesturing toward the newly bloomed section of the garden Elena had cultivated. "It used to feel so empty out here. Now it feels like somewhere people actually want to be." "Gardens need patience," Elena said, brushing dirt from her hands. "You plant something small, and you trust it will grow into something worth the wait. Is that how you think about all of this?" Lucia asked, glancing toward the main house where Dominic and Vincent had been locked in strategy discussions for hours. "I hope so," Elena admitted. "I have to believe the waiting will be worth it." That evening, Antonio arrived unexpectedly, his expression grave as he met privately with Dominic in the study. Elena waited anxiously in the sitting room, unable to focus on anything until Dominic finally emerged, his jaw set with quiet determination. "Greco is calling in every remaining favor he has left," Dominic told her, sitting beside her and taking her hand. "Antonio believes this gathering tonight is his final attempt before he either succeeds or loses everything. We intend to make certain it's the latter." "Is it dangerous?" Elena asked, unable to keep the worry from her voice. "It's necessary," Dominic said gently. "I need you to stay here, safe, with Lucia and the additional guards we've stationed around the property. I promise you, I will come back the moment this is finished." Elena searched his eyes, wanting desperately to argue, to insist on being there beside him the way she had been through every other difficult moment of the past months. But she understood, too, that some battles required a different kind of courage. The courage to wait, to trust, to believe in the people fighting on her behalf. "Come back to me," she said simply, pressing a kiss to his palm before he pulled his hand away. "Always," he promised, before disappearing into the night with Vincent and a small group of trusted men, leaving Elena to face the longest hours of waiting she had ever endured. 2 nights later, the tension finally broke. Word arrived that Greco planned one final meeting, a last attempt to rally remaining support before abandoning his scheme entirely. Dominic and Antonio, working together now with unified purpose, arranged to intercept the gathering, ensuring Greco's plans collapsed entirely under the weight of exposed evidence and unified opposition from every family whose trust he had hoped to manipulate. Elena waited anxiously at the estate that night, Lucia keeping her company as hours stretched painfully slow, until finally, near dawn, Dominic returned home, exhaustion evident in his features, but relief clear in his eyes. Elena rushed to meet him at the door. "It's over," he said simply, pulling her gently into an embrace that spoke more than words ever could. "Greco's influence has collapsed. No family in this city will support him now, not after everything that's been exposed. The alliance with Antonio stands stronger than I ever imagined possible." Relief flooded through Elena, and she allowed herself, finally, to fully believe that the danger surrounding them had passed. "It's really over," she repeated softly, still processing the weight of everything they had endured together over the past months. "It is," Dominic confirmed, pulling back slightly to meet her eyes, something tender and unguarded shining there. "Because of you, Elena. Your courage exposed everything before it could truly threaten what matters most." In the weeks that followed, life at the estate settled into a quieter rhythm, the constant tension of secrecy and danger slowly giving way to something calmer, steadier. Elena's 6-month arrangement was drawing toward its final weeks, the original agreement that had brought her into Dominic's world approaching its natural end. And yet, despite the freedom waiting for her beyond that deadline, Elena found herself reluctant to imagine a life apart from the one she had built, unexpectedly and imperfectly, within these walls. One evening, as the last golden light of sunset filtered through the garden where Elena often found peace among the flowers she had grown to cultivate there, Dominic found her sitting quietly on a bench beneath an old oak tree, her expression thoughtful. "You've been quiet today," he observed, settling beside her. "Just thinking," Elena admitted. "Our arrangement ends soon." Dominic was quiet for a long moment, something vulnerable crossing his usually composed features. "I've been thinking about that too," he said finally. "More than I probably should." Elena turned to face him fully, her heart beating faster despite the calm evening around them. "And what have you been thinking?" "That I don't want this to end," he said simply, honestly, without any of the careful control that usually guided his words. "Not because of the alliance, not because of appearances, but because somewhere along the way, Elena, this stopped being an arrangement for me entirely. You became the truest thing in my life, even when everything around us was built on pretense." Tears gathered unexpectedly in Elena's eyes, months of fear, danger, and slowly blossoming feeling finally converging into this single, honest moment. "I feel the same way," she whispered. "I came into this world terrified, trying only to save my shop and survive 6 months in a stranger's house. Instead, I found something I never expected to find again: real trust, real partnership, real love." Dominic reached for her hand, holding it gently, his thumb tracing slow circles across her knuckles. "Then stay," he said softly. "Not because of any arrangement, not because of any debt owed or paid. Stay because this life, this home, feels incomplete without you in it." "Are you asking me to marry you?" Elena asked, a small, disbelieving laugh escaping despite the emotion thick in her voice. "We're already married, technically." "On paper," Dominic said, a genuine smile finally breaking through his usual composure. "I want to marry you for real, Elena. No arrangement, no performance for anyone else's benefit. Just us, choosing each other honestly, for exactly who we are." Elena's tears finally fell freely, joy replacing months of accumulated fear and uncertainty. "Yes," she said softly. Then again, stronger, more certain. "Yes, Dominic. I choose you too." Their small wedding took place weeks later in that same garden, beneath the old oak tree where Dominic had asked her to stay, surrounded only by those who truly mattered: Lucia, Vincent, and even Antonio, who had become, unexpectedly, a trusted friend through everything they had endured together. Elena wore simple ivory, no elaborate performance necessary this time, just quiet, genuine joy shared among people who understood exactly how far they had come. As Dominic slipped a ring onto her finger, his eyes never leaving hers, Elena thought back to that first frightened night in her flower shop, the impossible bargain that had changed the entire course of her life. She had walked into Dominic Rossi's world as a stranger playing a desperate role, terrified and uncertain, and she was walking out of that same uncertainty now as his true wife, having found in the most unexpected circumstances imaginable a love that was entirely, completely real. The flowers around them, grown from cuttings Elena had carefully tended in the estate garden over the past months, bloomed vividly in the afternoon sun, a quiet symbol of everything that had grown between them despite the danger and deception that once surrounded their beginning. Whatever challenges still waited in the complicated world Dominic inhabited, Elena faced them now not as a frightened outsider, but as his equal, his partner, and the woman he had chosen, not out of necessity, but out of genuine, unshakable love. And as the sun set gently over their small, quiet celebration, Elena understood with complete certainty that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the truest endings, and that the story that started with a desperate bargain in a struggling flower shop had become, against every possible odd, a genuine and lasting love story of her very own.